Thank you for coming down. I just have a few questions to ask you. Well, Ben and Claire, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. You know, Ben, we were able to connect via Podmatch, and I just wanted to mention that real quick because I don't know if you actually know Alex, but he's a great guy, and I love what Alex Sanfilippo is trying to build over there. So I'm glad we were able to connect through it.
Yeah, Alex and I were actually able to jump on a Zoom call and we had a whole conversation and find out what he was about. And I said, okay, I'm in. What do we need to do? Let's figure it out.
I love it. That's a great approach too. Like we were talking about before the show, that's not always the way that I approach things, but that's awesome when you can do that. Let me ask you, so just to get started, maybe Claire, I'll start with you. Maybe tell us just a little bit about your story and a little bit of maybe a brief introduction.
All right, so a little bit of my backstory. My name is Claire Chandler. I spent the bulk of the earlier part of my career in corporate America, and took a leap, more a leap of faith than than a leap of a plan in 2011, and went out on my own. And 2 years later, I officially formed my business called Talent Boost, and I am a solopreneur, but I serve CEOs, founders, and owners that are at a point where they're looking to scale their business. And so I bring a strategic leadership perspective to help them to do that with fewer growing pains and with little to no performance bottlenecks.
Wow. Very cool.
Keeps me busy, keeps me out of trouble.
I'm sure it does. And it's got to be a little scary launching your own company and so forth, but.
Yeah, a little more exhilarating than scary, really. It was kind of one of those, life is too short not to try this. And I haven't looked back, and I've been loving it.
Absolutely. That's awesome.
Entrepreneurship is a wild ride.
It is. It is.
It is. I actually it was a small business, but I'd ran a landscape company prior to doing this, which a lot of the listeners know. And yeah, it's a completely different perspective. In fact, I wish, as most of the listeners know, I'm in law enforcement now, I like having that small business perspective coming into the government world, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit later as we get into leadership and so forth. But I definitely like having that basis to build upon. So Ben, what's a little bit of your story?
Well, about 25 years ago, I call myself a retired high-tech sales guy. I was on the road about 200 days a year, actually in an airplane 200 days a year. And I looked at my wife, and it was a divorce waiting to happen. So I got out of high tech and got into marketing and started off killing a lot of trees. I did direct mail for years and years, the 500,000 piece runs, the 1,000,000 piece runs, just these enormous direct mail campaigns. And what I realized is that the more that I was able to figure out what somebody's story was, it was easier to tell it. And very few companies understand their brand, who they are, what they do, why they do it, who they do it for, and why people should care. So about 10, 15 years ago, when I started off your brand marketing, it was all about branding. It was all about how do we tell the story effectively. So I started this company, January of 2008. If you want to start a company in the absolute wrong time, January 2008 is about the same as about April 2020. It's about the same. So what I was luckily enough to do is that a lot of my clients came with me and they treated me very well and helped me along. But what I realized about 7 years ago is that a lot of companies tell their brand story well externally. They're horrific telling it within the company. So you wonder why there's huge turnover. You wonder why there's siloing. You wonder why there's disengagement of employees. It's because people don't understand the story. They don't understand the purpose, the vision, the mission, the values. They're words that are on a page, but nobody lives them. My goal is to help with that. So we build leadership teams together and give them a common language, give them a common purpose, give them a common vernacular that allows them to be able to bring the team along so they can engage, retain, and grow employees. and have a more effective brand, have more effective customers, have a better customer experience, and more loyal customers.
Okay, I love it. Let me ask, just as a quick little rabbit trail, is does the story affect the culture? Does it drive the culture of a company?
You know what? One feeds the other.
Okay.
You know, culture feeds the story and story feeds the culture. The story perpetuates the culture. If you don't have a strong culture, you don't have a story to tell.
I love
So
that.
it's one of those, you need to have the culture. You need to sit there going, this is our purpose. This is what we believe in. This is, you know, where we came from. This is where we are. This is where we're going. And then you can tell that story. So, but that story is integrated into the culture. But if you don't have the culture in the first place, you can tell all the stories you want. No one's going to believe it.
Right. I love that. That's a good distinction. So how did you guys start working together? What is y'all's story? And either one of you who wants to tell it.
Yeah,
Claire,
well, I
you're
mean,
up.
sure. So the power of LinkedIn, right? So we were introduced, Ben and I, earlier this year by a mutual colleague on LinkedIn, who said you guys should should have a conversation. You might find some things in common. And that was an understatement. Ben and I got onto a Zoom call, and the first one was sort of a meet and greet, and we just found that we were kindred spirits in terms of our perspective on leadership and culture and the brand, and the purpose of a company being the bedrock on which great companies are built. So we connected and we continued those conversations, and all of a sudden Ben said, we need to record these conversations because
Mm-hmm.
there's some real useful information here. And that led to an idea to record a weekly YouTube conversation, which turned into 12 episodes of just solid gold, guidance for leaders on how to not just survive this crazy time that we're in with a global pandemic, but how to thrive through the other end of it. And it starts and ends with leadership, right? With quality leadership, with effective leadership, cohesive leadership. So yeah, it was from one quick introduction on LinkedIn. We recorded these amazing YouTube conversations, have turned them into podcasts, and are soon to release a book based on the dialogue that we've had.
That's awesome. And, I find that interesting as a matter of asides that, when you think of podcasting and you think of the current world and environment we're in, everything is very disconnected. In fact, we're connecting via Zoom right this moment. And yet those old fashioned business techniques of, hey, you two need to meet. Hey, we need to have a conversation. Even if it's coffee via Zoom, while doing podcasting, I've built more relationships through good old fashioned handshaking, if you would, than probably any other time in my business career. It's kind of interesting how the two work hand in hand and simultaneously.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, I've had a podcast now for 3 years now. I've got over 160 episodes called the Your Living Brand Live show. And I learned something from people every single week. Every single week, I have somebody on my show telling a story about who they are, what they do, and why they do it, and the relationships that I formed and the ideas that I get. I mean, it's almost like free consulting, where
Yeah,
I get to bring people on as a guest and pick their brain for an hour, and it's a lot of fun, and you build some great relationships out of that.
couldn't agree more. And yeah, I have the same advantage. And even though it's primarily, obviously, I'm in law enforcement, that's why I kind of geared it towards everybody's story and reaching out. And I found a lot more success in that because everybody has a story. And that's one of the things that I keep trying to point out, even about law enforcement, because so often it's like, oh, well, this person's a cop, or that's what they are 24/7. Well, no, they're a person whose vocation happens to be law enforcement. And there's a lot more to that person. And that's always been the premise of kind of what we're trying to build. So I love exactly what you're saying. Let me ask, Ben, can you expound? I want to go down this idea of what is a leader. That's kind of my
Sure.
formational question.
Yeah.
But you mentioned this concept of leadership being a mindset, not a job title. Can you dig a little bit into that?
Yeah, you have a certain generation that's coming up and is already in the workforce that are all about the job titles. And I think that we have to get to a point where we get rid of the job titles, and people need to stop sitting there going, well, I need to be a vice president of whatever by the time I'm 33, or I'm nothing. And what they need to do is start sitting there going, okay, how can I be a better person? And how can I help the company be better because of it? My attitude is leadership starts from ground zero, from the day you walk into the company. The ideas that you form, the communication that you have, the relationships you form, the trust that you build. It's all about how do you wake up every morning and say, how do I make the people around me better? And I don't care if you're a frontline employee, I don't care if you're a first time manager, I don't care if you're the CEO. If you're truly in a leadership mindset, your mindset is, how do I make people better? It's not an ego thing. It's not look at me. It's not look at my title, look at my paycheck, look at my stock options, look at how important I am, because really none of that really matters. A great leader is judged by the people around them. And a great leader is judged by the amazing things that the teams do and how the company thrives because of the person in that one position. It has very little to do with whether you have VP, director, manager, or whatever in front of your title. Those are just words.
Yeah. And Claire, piggyback on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I completely agree. I think, going back to Ben's comments about culture, I truly believe that the biggest impact on a workplace culture is the behavior of a company's leaders. Because it's infectious, and it can be infectious for the positive as much as for the negative. And employees are watching, they are observing what gets rewarded, who gets promoted, and why. And so it is really important for leaders walking around, as Ben said, to not get hung up on the trappings of leadership, of the title of it, and the compensation and the golden parachutes and all of that, but really accept that it is it's an obligation to really pull your people along. Much like a commitment to a career in law enforcement is not about, yay, I get to carry a gun and I get to wear a shiny badge. It's about, I have this higher obligation to impact my community, to protect and to serve it, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
In higher ways. And I think, if you go into law enforcement, it's pretty clear what your mission is, right? And part of the they don't call it onboarding, but the indoctrination when you enter law enforcement is around that, is making sure you understand what you're getting into, that it's not all parades and heroes welcomes. It's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of learning, and often it's there's some failure involved. And I think leaders in all walks of life, in all industries, and at all levels, really need to get much clearer on why they are in a position of leadership in the first place. Because if they're not clear on why they are called to lead, why they've been asked to step up, or why they, aspired to leadership, they're never going to be able to get employees to follow them. So, clarity to me is absolutely a fundamental element of what makes a leader great and what makes their company great.
yeah. I mean, to add to that, you don't follow somebody, you don't trust somebody because of a title.
Right.
I don't care whatever the title is. I don't care if it's President of the United States. I don't care if it's officer. I don't care whatever it is. You follow that person because you trust them, because you know, like, and trust them, and you believe that they have your best interest at hearts. That you believe that they know where they're going, they have a clear direction, they're communicating it effectively, and they want to take you along with them. It's about us. It's not about me. And the title bumps, the paychecks, the golden parachutes, all those are dividends.
Right.
Those are dividends because you've done your job, and your job is taking care of the people around you. For your fellow brothers and sisters, it's protect and to serve. That's leadership.
Right.
It's taking care of the community. It's taking care of each other. It's taking care of the first responders around you. That's leadership, and that doesn't matter if you're a sergeant or a captain or whatever. It's about making sure that the people around you know that you have their back and they have your back.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think to piggyback on that as well, it's kind of that whole idea of story also, because if you're, and of course, tell me if I'm wrong here, but my thinking would be is that by communicating properly the story or building upon that culture, then a good leader is calling people up into this story, into something that's bigger than themselves. And people want to follow that. People want to engage with that greater, broader story and be a part of it, pushing it forward, kind of the protect and serve aspect in the law enforcement community.
Well, the great thing about a story is compared to a mission, vision, value statement. And it's important to have mission, vision, values. Don't get me wrong. The problem is those statements tend to be, contrived in a weekend retreat by a bunch of people that are sitting in a glass room, sitting there. Oh yeah, customer experience, that sounds good, and employee loyalty, yeah, that sounds good. So we'll put all those in there. But when it comes down to the next day and the next month and the next year, they're not living those. A brand story, the reason that you have a story is for 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years, people recall stories, they internalize them, they retell them, they remember them, and they make them their own. And when your employees make the story their own and they start telling the brand story from the I position instead of them position, all of a sudden they're drinking the Kool-Aid. And when people are drinking the Kool-Aid, they're going to be far more motivated to see the team succeed because they see themselves as part of the team.
I love it. Claire, can you take us a little bit further into talent isn't born, it's boosted?
Sure. So, I work with a lot of leaders about, this concept of becoming followable, right? Getting to a point in your leadership where you're very clear on your mission, to the point where your employees, your senior leadership team, et cetera, can rally around that. And oftentimes leaders will say to me, but I'm not charismatic. If you look at, right, if you look at some of these other leaders, they just have it. They just have this gift that I don't have. And the reality is very, very few people are born just walking out of the womb as charismatic leaders that can just spin a phrase and do it in a way that, connects with me emotionally, et cetera. So that's, that was the concept or the principle that I based my business around was anybody can be can perform at a higher level, can lead at a higher level, can build a company that achieves a higher level. But you have to believe in that. You can't just believe, well, some people are just, born with that gift. Some people have it, some people don't. And so, that's really the core of my work is to kind of get leaders, especially, out of their own way and say, if you aspire to build a business that you believe in, where you can attract the right talent to help you get there in a way that everybody can see their connection to where you want to go and how they can contribute their best talents, we can do that. We can, we can boost the way you lead. We can boost the way that your employees see the world and how they contribute to that. So that was kind of the backstory behind that, what became the tagline for Talent Boost.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Let's switch gears real quick here to what you guys have going on. Obviously, 2020 has been an interesting year. Some would say
To say the least.
Completely fallen apart.
It's been kind of boring. Is anything been
Yeah,
happening?
that's true. Nothing really going on.
I don't notice anything. Well, I just got back from a vacation in Wyoming, and out there my phone didn't work. So for those 4 days, nothing was going on, and the world was wonderful.
Perfect.
Nice.
I need that vacation.
I think
Right.
we all do. So
Yeah.
full disclosure here, I have to admit, I hate the term the new normal. So as we dig into this, I have to completely admit that personally, I usually say, I'm going to scream if I hear that term again. However, as leaders in business or in government or whatever the situation may be, the reality is we are going to be facing a new normal, and we really in many ways are. So can you take us a little bit into this project that you guys worked on as far as business and the new normal?
Well, let me just say something about the new normal first. The world is always going to be changing. It's changed before COVID. It will change after COVID. We're always living in a world that's going to be changing. There's always going to be some dynamic that's going to come up, and it's going to take what people consider reality and turn it on its head. Yeah. And so what we're our thought process is, and I'll let Claire get into this, is that the world is going to change. How do we cope? How do we position ourselves for whatever's next? Because there's always going to be a next. Whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a downturn in the economy, whether it's an upturn in the economy. There's always going to be something that's going to be out there that's going to affect the business, and it's going to affect the people that are either running the business or working in the business. So the question is, how do we adapt as leaders? How do we look forward? Keeping an eye on where we are today, but we need to look forward. But I'll pass it over to Claire from that point.
Sure. Yeah, and I think to that point, one of the things that this unprecedented crisis has sort of highlighted is that there are going to be two very fundamental skills or competencies that every person and every leader in every company are going to need to possess and demonstrate, and those are adaptability, as Ben said, and resilience. There have been crises in the past, and there will continue to be crises. And what prompted Ben and me to have this conversation, through the lens of COVID was, like Ben, I was having conversations with prospects and clients who were saying, I can't be thinking long term right now. I just need to keep the lights on. I need to, make sure that, my employees stay safe and stay healthy. And those are hugely important priorities, right? However, what we felt compelled to sort of come forward and have a dialogue around was, it's not enough as the top leaders in an organization just to focus on how do we get from the start of today to the end of today, from this week to next week. It is incumbent upon leaders to protect and serve your employees, right, for the near term, right, but still keep that other eye on the longer term horizon. Because if your fundamental role as a leader is to maintain mission clarity and to pull people forward and give them, some clear vision of that horizon, you can't be all about firefighting. There are certain parts of your organization that should be and must be, and you need to empower them to do that. But at the top levels of leadership, you have to maintain a course toward the future. Because, and what's interesting is when Ben and I started these conversations, this was back in March, I think, Ben.
Yeah,
and
it was
at that point,
early March.
COVID was going to be licked by, 4 weeks down the road, or definitely by this date or that date. And the reality became, as we got deeper into these conversations and we got deeper into the spring and the start of summer, COVID's not going away anytime soon. And whether you call it a resurgence or it hasn't really left, it is going to be with us for the foreseeable and unfortunately unforeseeable future. And the ramifications of that, even if it miraculously disappeared tomorrow, and there are some political leaders who still think that it's going to miraculously disappear someday. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But even if it did, the consequences of the pandemic, the impact on employees' lives and companies' futures and the economy on a global scale will be felt for at least 3 to 5 years. Even if it vanished off the earth tomorrow, right? There's a recovery to that. And so, Ben and I were very, kind of motivated around, people are stuck and people are so entrenched in and distracted by and depressed around, this COVID thing that's impacting us. And we don't want to minimize that, but we want to keep people going and keep people looking toward the future, because you're not going to thrive in the future, let alone survive today, if all you're doing is just worrying about the immediate day tomorrow.
Right. And to add to that, the challenge is that people are sitting there going, well, I don't know what's next. None of us do. None of us do. I mean, even if COVID never existed, we still wouldn't have known in February what September was really going to look like. We would have an idea. We would have plans. We would have, put processes and procedures in place. but something could have come up that changed it in September.
Right.
And we need to sit there and say, we need to keep going, but it's all about that adaptability. And sit there and say, no, we're not out of this. We're not out of this by a long shot. But we can't just sit there and grab our knees, rock back and forth, and wait for the next, checks to come in from the government. And there's a lot of companies that are sitting there going, well, if I can just, get this loan, then I can hold off for another 90 days and then we'll go back to the way things were. Well, we're never going back to the way things were.
Right.
I don't care what you do. I don't care if you work for somebody, you work for yourself, you're part of an enormous organization. Nothing is ever going to be the way that it was because it can't be. We only move forward. And if we can start thinking about, okay, the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, this is where we're going. And we know that's going to change. And we need to start be looking at, okay, as we're heading down this path, where is the path going? Okay, it's splitting left, right. Which way are we going to go? And why? And when leaders can start thinking about the why and be able to communicate that why to the people that they, that they take care of and they're part of, those people will follow them. But if there is no sense of direction, if the regular rank and file have no sense of direction, if they have no idea where you're going or what your purpose is or why you're doing what you're doing, they're going to go start looking for someone else who does because there's no trust. And that's when companies are going to really collapse.
I'm sure there's a lot to this there, and of course you guys have a book coming out and so forth that's going to break that down, but just on kind of the surface though, would you say communication is maybe one of the key elements here that we're discussing when we talk about the whole adaptability and resilience?
I would absolutely say communication, and it's funny. Leaders are very quick to say that they communicate, and they kind of stand there and they say, "Ha, we just issued a mission statement," which as either Ben or I can equally rant on the uselessness of your standard mission statement, right? But they may send out an email with an update on how we're faring, and think that that's communication, or do a walk around once a year and talk to a sampling of 3 different employees and pat themselves on the back that they communicated. Part of the conversations that we recorded and have transformed into this book, we talk about the fact that communication by its very nature is one way. It is always only in one direction at a time. And really what leaders need to be thinking about is how to turn that communication into connection. And there are a couple of ways in this day and age that they can do that. I talked about mission clarity before. The clearer leaders are on the mission, which may be impacted by COVID, it may not. It may be the guiding force that pulls you through, only if you're clear about it. But the clearer you are with your mission, the easier it is for employees to either decide, yes, I can see a connection between that mission and what personally drives me, or the flip side, which is I don't identify with that and I'm going to self-select out. It's just as important now to reinforce that connection around what you stand for and where you want to go, so that you get the right people on the bus, so to speak. And the other piece that's a very key opportunity that Ben and I talk about in the book, and on the video conversations, is this concept of reboarding every employee, right? There is a very unique opportunity right now. Even if you have a really robust, very successful new hire onboarding process and program, we're in uncharted waters. And a lot of these companies had to pivot the way that they get things done, whether they had to shift to remote work or they're essential employees. And so now they had to layer on a whole bunch of new processes to sterilize their working environment, or to still get their job done while being more distant from the next person in the value chain, right? And so there's a really key opportunity right now to usher back in and reform the workforce that you have, plus the workforce that you're going to add in going forward, and reintroduce people and reconnect them to what your company is all about, where you're going to go in the future, and your commitment to keeping their, their roles safe, their jobs safe, but their careers nurtured, into the future. So there's a real opportunity for companies that want to see that and are, willing to, kind of put in a little bit of that elbow grease. But that's where, yes, communication is absolutely critical, but it goes deeper than a simple one-way passing of information.
Yeah, I agree with that because we're at a position here where a lot of things got done with duct tape and band-aids over the last 120 days. We
Yes.
needed to send everybody home. Okay, everybody go home and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Now it's like, okay, everybody's coming back. We need to bring everybody back correctly. And we need to make sure what were the policies, what were the procedures, what did we implement that were band-aid solutions and what was innovative? And what are the sacred cows? What are the things that we've always done that no longer apply? And how do we change them? How do we augment and how do we communicate all that to our people? Because COVID-19 will not be your brand story, but it will be part of it. To sit there and say, these are the challenges that we faced. These are the lessons that we learned. These are the skills that we realized that we had. These are truly the clients that we can now serve. This is where we are going forward. And this is why you and you are important to that success as an employee of the organization.
I love that.
Because people need to understand as they come back to the office, it's not coming back to work because people have been working through this whole thing. As people come back to the office, they need to understand what's the new game. How has the game changed? Is there now a 110-yard field where it used to only be a 100-yard field? Is it 38 yards wide instead of whatever standard width is? How has the game changed, and how does that thing affect me? Because that's what people care about.
Right.
As long as they realize how it affects them, and they go, "Oh, okay, I can deal with that." They're more likely to be on board and become champions than if they just don't get it. If they don't, they just say, "Well, we now do it this way, and don't ask me why. We just do it this way."
Right.
That leads to frustration. That leads to employees, becoming disengaged. That becomes people being surly. It becomes people wanting to leave the company. And every employee that leaves your company costs you $100,000 to replace. We already have 70% disengaged employees in the workforce pre-COVID.
Wow.
If we're not able to communicate where we're going, that number is only going to get worse. And even if, say, we could move it from 70% to 50%, think of what that would do to accelerate the economy. Think of what that would do for productivity. Think about what that would do for customer experience. Think about what that would do for employee loyalty. If all of a sudden we had employees that sat there and said, I understand where the company is going. I understand what my position is within this company. I understand what the opportunities are for me moving forward. I'm not going anywhere. I want to be part of this.
Yeah.
I liken this process that Ben just took us through in the concept of reboarding with moving into a different house. Mm-hmm. But, when you move, it is a great opportunity to declutter and to get rid of those piles of magazines and collectibles and knickknacks and everything else that you've been holding on to, but ceased to bring value or feng shui or anything else, whether it's utilitarian or decorative, right? And so, as leaders are bringing their employees back into this sort of shifted reality, it's trying so hard not to say new normal, but this shifted reality, right?
Say it, Claire.
Yeah,
Say
I
it.
you've made a good point that it exists, so I guess we're good.
Right? That's all good. But it again is an opportunity to kind of learn, what did this latest crisis teach us? And part of what it taught us is there were processes and systems and rules and policies and just the way that we were working that we stopped doing because we had to shift to remote work, or we had to be more mindful of taking temperatures in the morning and wiping down surfaces and all of that. But what are some of the things that don't surface anymore? Mm-hmm. We stopped doing during this period of lockdown or restrictions, and we haven't missed a beat. Don't pick them up and take them into the new house, right? Offload those, throw them out, sell them in a yard sale, whatever you need to do. But you now have this opportunity to move into a house that's better for you, with less of the clutter and the crap that weighed you down before COVID, right? Because as Ben said before, this is not the first crisis we've gone through in a business. It's the most global one we've ever experienced. But even companies that have gone through something that's local, that only impacted their company or their one facility, they have to go through those same things. They have to look back and say, okay, we were caught flat-footed, we weren't completely prepared, but we shifted gears. We not only kept the lights on, we kept the customer served, et cetera. What else did we learn from this? What did we turn away from that we don't have to turn back to because we didn't miss it, it didn't interfere with us being able to deliver on time and bring in revenue and pay our employees, et cetera. So yeah, it's as you look to kind of get everyone refocused on the road ahead, don't turn back and say, oh, but don't forget that whole storage room where we've got all those boxes that we haven't opened since 1983.
I love that.
But to play on that analogy, you also can't let mom and dad throw out 100 boxes of stuff without asking the kids.
And know what's in it. Absolutely.
You know what's in it, because
my baseball card collection, it was worth thousands.
I had my parents throw out my entire Hardy Boys collection in the hardcover. Well, I was away at camp one summer. It all went in a garage sale. Never asked me. They assumed I read them all. Oh yeah, totally. And I still blame them. 35 years later. But
I love the Hardy Boys series myself, so I'm with you.
Exactly. But it's one of those things that we need to sit there and talk to our employees and ask them, what are the things that are holding us back? What are the things that you see that could be changed, that could make our lives better? Because your brand is only as valuable as your unhappiest employee on their worst day.
I love that.
So if you think about that, if you can alleviate that unhappiness by changing simple policies and procedures that were just ineffective, that were just bottlenecking people and frustrating people, by asking people, saying, okay, if you had the chance to change 3 things, what would they be? And you know what? Let's be realistic. We're not going to be able to change everything. We're not going to be able to make everybody happy. We're not going to be able to create utopia for everyone. But if we can sit down and we can listen to our employees and ask them, what are the things that are important? We're going to come up with the top 10, 20, 30, 40 things that'll make the company better, and say, you know what? Yours was number 45. That's great. We love that. We don't have the bandwidth to do this right now. We're doing these other things and we want to get these things on board, but let's stick a pin on this and let's talk about this in 6 months and see if it's still a problem.
Yeah.
And if you cannot ignore number 45 or 73 and say, this is why it didn't make the top things, we're working on these things first, let's get this solved, and then we can start working on the next group, you're going to bring those people along. But if you say, oh, well, Sarah got her thing and I didn't get anything that I wanted, and it's just left like that, then all of a sudden you're going to have that unhappy employee. Right. But if we can communicate why we decided to go with these things as the things that we're going to go implement right away, and these things, yes, they're important, but they're less important, and we just don't have the bandwidth, the money, or whatever to move forward with everything at the same time, people are willing to live with that. As long as you don't forget about those things, you come back to it and say, is that still a problem? Okay, what are some little things? We can't fix the whole thing right now, but what are some little things that we could do to make that better? And be able to sit there and say, you know what? It may just be putting a Band-Aid on some of those lower, tier items for the time being. But those Band-Aids enable people to feel that they were listened to, they were understood, and they were valued. And that is what helps make employees happier.
I love that. I had a teacher, to kind of go down a little bit different road, but along these same lines. I had a captain that she taught a leadership class that I went through for line supervision. And she referred to law enforcement as 100 years of tradition uninterrupted by progress. So when we have this conversation and we gear it more towards government, do these same rules, processes, because typically in the government side, especially in law enforcement or military, it's a chain of command style. It's usually a top-down style leadership. Do these same rules, processes, ways to deal with change, do they still apply?
I would say to a point, yes. If is it harder? Absolutely, it is, and it depends much stronger on leadership. And Claire, I really want to hear your thoughts on this, but I think it really comes down to, you know, the nice thing about military, police, those type of organizations, government, is there tends to be a stronger mission, vision, value statement that people understand.
Yeah.
Because it's clearer, it's simpler, it's understood. This is what we do, and therefore there are those opportunities, but there desperately needs to be change within all these types of organizations to be able to throw out some of the old and bring in the new. And that comes down to leadership. That comes down to training leaders at all levels to be able to sit there and say what's working, what's not working, and within our traditions, within our story, within who we are, how do we make things better? But Claire, let me get your vision on that, because you'll say
Yeah.
it way more eloquently than I will.
Well, a lot of pressure. Thanks, Ben. I'm married to a veteran of the Marine Corps. And he was also, after being a devil dog, he was also in law enforcement for a time before he went into a different career. And so we have this conversation quite a bit, not only about what the military and what law enforcement instilled in him, and what made him gravitate toward a role in law enforcement after leaving the Marines. But I think on the flip side of it's also why a lot of veterans from the military struggle to transition into a civilian role, because they are still looking for a very strong mission, to adhere to buy into, to follow, and to execute, right? And so I think, those same principles of being very, very clear on your mission apply in the military, certainly, in law enforcement, absolutely, and should apply in the government, right? Should apply in the government, because, and I think that the difficulty, especially with the military and with law enforcement, is there is such a strict respect for the chain of command. And on the outside, you can think, well, why is that a barrier? Well, it's a barrier to collaborative approaches to solving problems, right? And it is a potential barrier to applying a more innovative approach, because you are so accustomed to taking direction, not asking questions, and going out there and getting the job done. And it can be more nuanced than that, even in government. For all the bureaucracy and for all the red tape, it can still be more nuanced than just saying, this is what the expected outcome is. Don't ask questions, don't pass go directly there and get that done. So I think, I say to a lot of leaders who are looking to hire, they've got this sort of sense of duty that, I want to hire as many veterans as possible. And then they do, and then they struggle with managing and leading, folks who have retired from the military or have transitioned from law enforcement, because it is such a black and white worldview, right? I expect direct orders, clear expectations, and then get out of my way, and I'm going to, lay in traffic for you. Well, a lot of leaders are not quite sure how to motivate somebody like that if they are not, in fact, clear about what the mission is. If it's, if they've kind of fallen into this corporate doublespeak, or this sort of, we've got to not be as we have to appear transparent without being transparent. People see right through that. Mm-hmm. So, I think especially in the, in law enforcement and in government, there is such a thirst for a mission that they can attach to. And if they can, there's really no stopping them. But that I see are the bigger challenges, are kind of getting them to give themselves permission to collaborate and to bring in other views and to manage up, which is a very difficult but essential skill in the workplace, is effectively managing up. I have a client who is a great leader, and he's a very no nonsense. This is what I want out of people. And no one on his team can say, first of all, they don't say he's warm and fuzzy, but no one on his team can say they're not clear on where they stand or what he expects of them. But where he struggles is managing up and managing to his shareholders to say, you know, I've got to put my foot down and this is what I need. Because when he reports up to his board of directors, he sees them as, you know, higher ranking officers than he is. So that's something he continues to struggle with.
Very good. No, anecdotally, I've seen a lot of the things that exactly what you're saying, both on being on both sides of the fence. Because when I ran my landscape company, I had some family members who were military, and I was young. I was in my 20s, early 20s. And looking back now, especially in light of what you were just saying, I can see where there was definitely, because I was not in the military. In fact, I'd started a landscape company right out of high school. So that's what I'd been doing. So as a young, naive business owner, I can see where we had some disconnects because there wasn't that clear vision. There wasn't that clear expectation. And then now on the flip side of the house, that I'm in that environment, I kind of bring to the table a different way of thinking that isn't the same as a lot of these guys who came out of the military structure and, you know, are, because the guys my age in law enforcement now are either nearing retirement or most of them aren't just starting out as I am or within 8 years or so as I am. So I definitely, to just piggyback on that, see exactly what you're saying. It definitely is a dichotomy of how it's perceived and then how it's instituted.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What I see within both the military and the law enforcement, and actually any of the services, is that the real adaptability comes at the unit level. There's an overall mission, vision, value statement that everybody understands. Everybody understands the chain of command. Everybody understands the purpose and the vision, but how that is carried out in one unit versus another unit is completely different. Yeah. And that comes down to individual leadership. It comes down to the team itself. It comes down to what their individual mission is within their unit itself. Like a TAC unit, is very different from Vice, right, and everything in between. So if you take a look at the different types of units and how they interrelate to each other and how they relate to different units, they're all part of Behind the Blue Line. However, they all have their own set of rules for their teams.
Right.
And those rules are very unwritten and they're very, very well understood.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very good point. That kind of shows, it depends. The leadership skills and so forth are exactly the same. But when you talk about law enforcement, like you said, you can be in completely different worlds, whether you're talking the investigative side of the house, you're talking patrol side of the house, and the leader, again, maybe going back to your original point on adaptability, really that's something you have to do on a regular basis, even when the world isn't falling apart, because you've got to adapt to that particular role. Let me just go down. So you guys have the book coming out. When does that release?
We're probably, about 3 or 4 weeks away right now?
Yeah, I would say our goal is to release it in August.
Very good. I'll make sure that I link all that up. You have the Leaders Made Here program. Can someone tell us a little bit about that and what that's all about?
Well, the Leaders Made Here program is about to change. Okay. We, within the last 72 hours, have aligned ourselves with a new organization called CEO Crossing. And they're a much larger organization, and they are a group that focuses on CEOs and those who want to become CEOs. And what they're interested in is us bringing the Leaders Made Here program and incorporating it into their program itself. The Leaders Made Here program is designed to help leaders at all levels level up. That's truly what it's designed to do. It's a peer group. It's an online peer group, and it allows people to learn from each other and to build on each other's experiences. Our original vision is to have a Facebook group that was going to succeed through that and allow people to become better leaders through that. I think, and we're still in negotiation process at the moment, we're going to be incorporating that within the CEO Crossing and be able to bring it to a much larger audience.
Perfect. That's great stuff. And I will say on the YouTube videos, I'll be linking all this up, but I started watching them, and like you guys said, there's a lot of gold in there, and they're absolutely phenomenal. As a matter of closing, I ask a question. I change it a little bit for every person that I'm speaking with, but boiling it down, and from each of you, both Ben and Claire, what is one thing, the one takeaway, because I like this to be actionable. So one takeaway that people can do that's going to make a profound difference in their personal lives, starting right this moment. What's that one thing they can do? And Claire.
In their personal lives, I think again, what this unprecedented pandemic has forced upon people is to change the way that they live their daily lives, and both personally and professionally. I'll come back to that word connection. We may now be more remote, more separated from people, and of course the downside to that, in the interest of self-preservation, the downside of that is potentially increased isolation. And I think, we're fortunate that we live in a time where through technology and other means, we can stay connected, to a certain degree. Nothing's going to replace a hug or a handshake. But, if people can understand that those people that they have connected with personally and professionally in the past, that they often saw in person, they're still out there. They still need to hear from you. They still need to know that you care about them. Yes, especially personally, but also professionally. So I think it kind of straddles those two lines. But yeah, for me, it's, take, kind of make a personal commitment to take a little bit of time every day to connect, in the recent past. And I think you're both going to benefit from that.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So
For
powerful.
me, yeah, it is extremely powerful. For me, it's everybody needs to give themselves the permission to realize A, they don't know everything, and B, that it's okay. It's perfectly okay not to know everything. None of us are all knowing. None of us have a clear answer of what's going on. A lot of us are flying by the seat of our pants. A lot of us are going to make mistakes. And as long as we dust ourselves off, learn from our mistakes, get better because of it, and go into the world and say, my job is to do no harm and to lift as many people as I can along the way with me, I think we're all going to be fine. It's realizing that, take the people around us, build partnerships, build alliances, find people with skills that you just don't have and bring them along. Walk hand in hand, skip down the aisle with them, whatever you need to do. But realize that this is not a solo sport anymore. Leadership has got to stop being a solo sport where people sit in their office and dictate what happens and think that they have to know everything, and if they don't, feel threatened by it. Realize that there are people that you're going to hire, and hopefully most of the people you're going to hire are smarter than you are. That they all have skills that you don't have, that they're better at things than you are. And that doesn't make you any less. That means you're the person that motivates them. That you're the person who inspires them. You're the person that gets them what they need and gives them the tools to thrive. That's your job as a leader. It's not to take all the credit, not to know everything, not to be, omnipresent or micromanaging. It's to sit there and say, how can I make the people around me better? And if I don't know, I'm going to go find somebody who does know and bring them to the table. Because the people, if somebody asks me the question, they deserve the right answer. And it's not up to me to fumble through an answer and hope they don't notice. That doesn't serve anybody.
Absolutely. That's incredible. And I tell you, we've just scratched the surface on this conversation, and just in this hour that we've been able to talk. I mean, phenomenal stuff. So obviously I want people to go to your site. We're definitely going to look at that book when it comes out. What is the best way to connect with you guys?
For me, you can go to clairechandler.net.
And me, it's yourbrandmarketing.com.
Perfect. I'll link all that up in the show notes. Claire and Ben, thank you so much. I wasn't sure from the law enforcement side, having a leadership podcast, but being the things we've gone over are phenomenal, not only in business, but also I think in our personal lives as well, if people just take some of these principles to heart. So thank you again, both of you.
Thanks, Wayne. It
Wayne,
was a pleasure.
thank you very much. And to all your brothers and sisters, stay safe out there and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.